How they try and how the old people, the old culture tries to help the new culture.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so far. We haven't met yet. Well, we haven't talked about it yet, which is positive.
I still like
Your-
through Black Spruce. Remember that?
Yes,
I like that.
Did you see that? The, CPC program of Gord Gaffney's.
I didn't see it. No.
That's based on Joseph Boyden's book.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get through. It's a series.
Do you want us to clean off the blackboard so you're not in front of all
I
these?
thought that was Jeff's
I
man.
thought it makes me look smarter than
Try to get through it. It's figured out.
Okay.
So should I sign up just
Grab a
because
seat up
to
front.
make good,
Yeah.
good?
Sure.
No, it's the same one. Upcoming monthly events, it's
Oh, yeah,
only one.
sorry. Oh, yeah.
Did you ever declare?
Yes, that's what, that's what it is.
Yeah, I don't think I need the mic, but you're.
You just took it away.
Worried about the map. It's about, oh, on.
I think you were my partner.
Yes, I remember, that's what it is, yeah, but sorry, I have to.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi everyone, welcome to this lecture organized by Science for Peace. My name is Adnan Zabiri, and I'm helping out with the monthly lecture series for this year. So we're off to a good start, and we have a number of very informative events planned out for the entire year. They will be available on our website, scienceforpeace.ca. We have a new website coming out, which will be I think will make a big difference in the traction that we get in getting important information out there. The new website should be going up hopefully within a week, and that's where all the events will be posted. So I hope we can check that out. And also we have a upcoming events sign-up sheet going around. So if you're interested, feel free to put your email address down on that. So in terms of a little bit of science, a little bit about Science for Peace itself, we have roughly 150 or more members consisting of students, academics, and people from the wider public. And they engage in pursuing peace through a scientific lens and try to address the most urgent problems to our planet, such as climate change, militarism, and so forth. Before I introduce our special guest here, I wanted to say that we do have a dinner after every event where we join with the speaker. I think you got everything figured out. Thanks. Okay. And so yeah, everyone's welcome to join us for dinner afterwards at the Prima Pub, which is right across the U of T main entrance at 191 Claude Street. So you can just walk there with me, so I'll lead the way there.
We should wait a bit, I think. It's
7:05, it seems like a decent time.
I would wait to give it back, because people, it's very hard to find the entrance, because somebody has taken down the posters that you put up. There's not a single poster. Two of us went around,
Maybe another 5 minutes?
I can find it.
Okay.
and so it's a difficult, it's not a place where people normally
We
go.
might be losing millions of viewers online as a way for waiting. It's no problem.
Just open another window and something else.
Sure, no problem. We get it everybody.
Okay, give it a couple minutes. I'm gonna go look in the hall if I see anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
There are several entrances to get.
I'll leave breadcrumbs along the way.
Where are the other entrance? Maybe I should go to the other one. But I have trouble finding it.
It's very circuitous.
Yeah.
Yes. See you tomorrow. You will come tomorrow.
Did you send me an invitation? Is that,
No. It's not
somebody
me.
sent me an email,
About what?
some business Facebook something. Can't remember what it's called. I don't do it, so I didn't answer.
No,
I didn't understand whose face it was. I could see the time picture.
And you received the book, yes, already?
I'm going to chat for me.
No,
Did you get yours?
no, I didn't. Because I missed last meeting. And I read it in the library, the chapters.
Did you?
Yes,
Oh, yes. It's complicated, isn't it?
complicated, like
I'm so-
frightening, I think so, about these monks and then nuns, about the chapter
Oh,
about
yes, horror.
horror, yes.
There.
And the first of the verse, no? At the end also there will be some horrors, no? I mean through the book,
I just went the first 3 chapters.
the first 3 chapters.
That's what we were signed, the first 3
So
chapters.
you read about this Sister Leopolda,
I did.
how did you find it? Did you read it?
Horrifying. But of course, that happened to lots of, similar things happen to lots of children, which is what we're supposed to know.
Because
It's in-
this child, she was mixed, like,
And burned.
what?
She was also burned, the numb.
I know, I mean the origin of the child. Why did Sister Leopolda did so? Why did she hate her life? Because
She's
of
just,
her
maybe
origin?
someone had treated her that way and she thought that's what needed to happen. I don't know, the other nuns,
There
sometimes
is
I'm
no
sure were
answer
nice.
why. She was white girl.
She's Métis. She was pale, so she looked white, no, I can tell, but
But she was Indian, no?
Métis. I looked-
Mixed,
when you look- when
mixed.
you-
Mother white and father, yeah.
So when you look in the chart, isn't that chart good? You can figure out what's going on. So I looked at that family history.
Mhm.
So did you get, so the lady, or they wanted a question from each of us. I sent one in.
Yes, I sent also. It will be okay.
I tried to explain.
She said we must send questions.
I know.
Because last time it was like, if you want or you don't want.
I think
But this time you must, yes. If
Well,
everyone-
if you don't have to do a question, you don't maybe think about what you read,
yeah. Maybe you didn't read it all.
or you didn't think about it.
A lot to think about, yes.
This is very complicated.
Very problematic. Problems, a lot of problems.
That means it's very hard to sort out because it's such a complex series of problems. Well, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
What?
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, see you tomorrow,
And
yes.
this man too.
Of course.
Sounds very much like a Stranger Things series going on. Two people go to rescue someone else.
There's several entrances and no elevator.
So somebody else will come, yes? From the group, somebody else will come? I mean,
Today?
yes, today.
I have no idea.
No idea, but you received email, yes? Yeah, from John?
Some people would want to, and some people wouldn't. Sir?
No, I was gonna try, but Josie, it's got me staying.
Which way do you
Come
turn?
to my room.
I still think it takes working, driving a bike. But it's good to get out to the county.
I forget your name.
Lena.
Oh, there we go.
You called me. Lena.
That's everything,
Lena.
reporters are just.
Lena. Right.
We've had someone.
Like Helen, yes. Because Helen is the same. Like
Yes, and
Greek equivalent for Helena. We call me Helen, but because no, I don't want to be like mispronunciation of the name is difficult.
sometimes people can't hear all the sounds. Their ears aren't.
What's a good repurposing?
So let me be Helen.
Yeah.
Just between us.
No, I should, would you like to be
Helen, okay.
I just.
Because first 3 years I lived in apartment and everybody called me Helen.
Well, I thought you just said Liliana.
Helena.
Yeah. So I was, yeah. Yeah, no,
But Helen, because my sister is Juliana and I am Helena. Just and it sounds like the same.
you don't,
Helena, like Helen.
you don't have that same throaty sound, you know. So you can't hear it, you can't say it. You have to kind of practice it when you're two.
Yeah, just
You have to practice sounds when you're two, so that they're natural, so that you can say them easily. Unless you practice a little bit. Sometimes people can't hear it. That's not about you, it's about how yours.
I heard the University of Windsor has grown very big now.
Writing in the reading more easy
Has
than
grown very
pronunciation.
big.
Yeah, it's certainly turned the corner in the last 5 or 6 years, and lots of new construction.
And many some Chinese people, they
Yeah.
just change their names.
Yeah,
This is FY.
it's coming along, I mean, during the economic crisis, it was a real big problem, because lots of young families moved away.
Yes,
You know, most of our
Seems
students,
like we-
most of our
Jews-
domestic
Jews-
students
Jews-
come from
Jews-
local
Jews do the
areas.
same thing.
There's lots of international students who've changed the situation.
They create such names like Home, June, July, Sun. Like this. Short and understandable.
Yeah, he was,
Easy.
he was grim 10 years ago.
Did
People
you
really
read
bad,
his book?
makes them stupid.
No, I only read, was part of his blog and then his app.
Oh, Batman doesn't disappear into whatever. Twilight Zone John is.
it's not going to come.
I have dreams like this, that
It's like
I have to be somewhere,
or something else.
and a
Because
series
he's
of
from
small
Egypt.
accidents
Did you read about it?
that each take
I
about a
mean,
minute.
why he come here to Toronto?
I'm going crazy.
Because of the
I
topic
really like to
that
be
is in his
on
book.
top.
Did you not read about it?
What's the purpose to come in my city?
To spread the word. The organization is called Science for Peace, and it's now doing training. Dr. Duncan is an ethics professor and is not as a philosophy. And they were talking about how to do the right thing. His book is about talking about his like I just spoke about. It has to do with whether Steven Pinker missed an arrow or two in his quiver when he wrote his book.
So his book was published long ago. A year ago.
I don't know, I never read it. I've only heard about him first today.
I
So
was so surprised, right? So like, I received email at 12 p.m.
Yes, me too. It was just a wondering if you want.
I want, I like to do this, like to practice, to do some scientific speech, because scientific speech is much more different from everyday speech.
John Duncan has a articles. He has a blog, he has a number of articles online. It's a lot of fun to read his book.
I want to listen to the live speech, it's very interesting.
Found some more stragglers.
Oh, good. They're probably waiting.
It's, there are too many doors when you don't know what you're building, right? I got lost again because I have no sense of orientation.
Oh, John is still lost.
that's good. If you can get the courtesy. Okay. We got you into the second twilight.
It is, there are people out there lost.
I got lost again. I came in through one door, and if you're not used to these buildings, it's very hard.
Okay, so I'll resume where we had left off. Seems like we're all ready to start. So I was just at the part where we were going to introduce our speaker here. So Jeff Noonan is professor of philosophy at the University of Windsor. While his interests have been quite broad and interdisciplinary, his interests and specialization are in social and political philosophy, critical theory, and contemporary European philosophy. His current book project is examining the existential dimensions of human finitude, defending the life value of human limitations against a naive and potentially destructive techno-utopianism.
It's done now, so if you have $30 burn home, embodied into the meaning of life. It's out.
He also maintains a very active blog at jeffnoonan.org, which I encourage everyone to check out. At least I found their articles to be very informative there, current events. He'll be talking about social and global peace. Does philosophy have anything to contribute? Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to John for recommending me to Adnan. I'm very happy to be here. The title of the talk, Social and Global Peace, does philosophy have anything to contribute? I think it does, but like many things to which philosophy contributes, it contributes in an underlying way, not necessarily in a directly transformative way. The paper is structured as a kind of critical dialogue with Steve Pinker. He just published Enlightenment Now, it was last year. This book, the paper looks mostly at his previous book, Better Angels of Our Nature, because that more directly concerns issues of war and peace. I have no particular axe to grind with Steven Pinker, but I think he exemplifies a certain one-dimensional understanding of Enlightenment rationality. And so the paper is an attempt to bring to light what I take to be the important contradictions of those principles. I've always defended the Enlightenment, but we have to understand it in historical context, and I think principles are a little less straightforwardly connected to peace than Pinker thinks. In any case, here we go. We got a little late start. I may edit as I go along and keep myself to be done by 10 to 8 or so. We'll see. On October 3rd, 2018, the Pentagon released a policy paper asserting its right to strike any enemy anywhere without congressional approval if the enemy were deemed a threat to its own or allied forces. And the allied forces are anyone the Pentagon decides in any moment are allied. The paper argued that congressional approval for operations is superfluous since the country is already locked in a permanent war ranging over a global theater of operations against a protean enemy. This war looks different from World War I or Vietnam, but it is, so says the armed forces waging it, a global war. Like all global wars since World War I, politicians justify it in the name of a future peace, a peace which has never arrived. By peace, I mean not just the absence of war, but positive relationships between societies marked by political negotiation as the default approach to conflict resolution, disarmament, cross-cultural learning and dialogue, cooperative management of scarce global resources, the end to exploitative forms of labor backed by coercive state power, and a universal commitment to the satisfaction of fundamental human life requirements. When those whose business it is to wage war tell us that they are locked into one which has no end in sight and requires unconstrained ability to respond, peace activists should listen. Who better to understand the state of conflict in the world than those who do the fighting? On the other hand, the Pentagon has an obvious interest in portraying itself as under siege from an elusive enemy. If there were no war, there'd be no need for expanded military budgets. Nevertheless, perhaps they distort the world in a purely self-serving way. Perhaps the world is, despite their bluster, getting more peaceful, to the point where, if present trends continue, we can envisage the possibility of a world without war. Perhaps what we need is an impartial view of the long sweep of human history. When we rise above the clash of political interests, it becomes clear that the world is getting less violent. Once we understand the causes of the ethical reduction in violence, we can apply the lessons and adopt policies that turn the absence of violence into positive peace. So claims Steven Pinker. Arguing from what purports to be the neutral bench of scientific psychology, Pinker amasses a wealth of statistical data that supposedly proves that, contrary to popular understanding and military bluster, the world is getting less dangerous, less violent, and more peaceful. The trend towards peace is the result of the cultural, moral, political, and economic pacification of aggressive instincts. These instincts are genetically hardwired into the cognitive and emotional structures of the human brain, and by and large determine the behavior of the earliest humans. Although genetically encoded, these structures are plastic. Their hold over us can be weakened by opposing forces and dispositions, those which allow us to adopt the perspective of others, create and enforce universal rules, and negotiate rather than fight. Unlike Freud, who saw civilization as a Manichaean struggle between the death and life instincts, Pinker claims that the better angels of our nature, that's the name of the previous book, are winning. Organized states, universal moral values centered on respect for individuals, international human rights law, market economies based on voluntary contract, and scientific rationality have progressively eaten away at the power of aggression and violence. According to Pinker, human beings began as bands of roaming hordes ready to raid and kill whatever competitors they came across, but over time, we have grown towards a community of Kantian reasoners, respecting everyone as ends in themselves. It's an attractive vision, and it's backed up by a wealth of data. It is also difficult to square with observation. The jarring contrast between daily reports of organized armed violence and Pinker's longue durée statistical picture have led some to re-examine his data sets and criticize his methodology and conclusions on mathematical grounds. I will leave the statistical argument to the experts. Others have examined his interpretation of the data about violence in early hunter-gatherer societies and argued that Pinker is empirically incorrect in his conclusions and normatively suspect in his presuppositions. I will draw on these conclusions because I think they shed light on a different socio-historical and political account of the causes of war that better explains the structure of conflict in the contemporary world. While it might be true that the frequency of major power warfare has declined between the Middle Ages and the 21st century, it is misleading to call the present world more peaceful in the positive sense in which I was using the term. But it is a peaceful world, not just a world in which hot wars are held at bay until deemed expedient, that we should want. I assume that Pinker would agree, but he does not give us the argument that we need to understand the changes that would have to be made to global political economy and its ruling value system to make that goal a reality. So I'm going to start by going through the basic structure of Pinker's arguments. Then I'm going to look at some anthropological and archaeological criticisms of his understanding of hunter-gatherer societies, following which I'm going to look more deeply into what I take to be the contradictions in Enlightenment and liberal values that he overlooks, and then I'll draw some conclusions at the end. Okay, Pinker's hopeful history. Pinker argues that war and interpersonal violence are ultimately caused by emotional and cognitive dispositions naturally selected for early in our evolutionary history. In his view, the scarcity of resources in pre-agricultural periods put a premium on aggression and rigid divisions between in and out groups. At the same time, the absence of states with a monopoly on the means of violence meant that there were no external checks on our violent impulses, while internal moral and rational inhibitors of violence had not yet developed. Rather than stigmatize violence, early moral systems justified revenge, while rationality was expressed as the strategy that the best defense is a good offense. Summing up his perspective, he asserts that, and I quote him here, the things we experience are patterns of activity in the evolved brain. It seems to me that a small number of quirks in our cognitive and emotional makeup give rise to a substantial proportion of avoidable human misery. So for Pinker, we're spring-loaded for violence, but we can learn to organize ourselves politically and govern ourselves rationally to minimize the actual outbreaks of destructive aggression. With this general view of evolved human nature as its foundation, Pinker reconstructs history along a vector that moves from rates of extreme violence in our pre-Neolithic ancestors toward what he calls the long peace during the Cold War and the new peace, so post-1989. Although the 20th century saw some of the most murderous wars, if the bodies are counted in absolute terms, the relative death rates he maintains, as well as the frequency of wars between major powers, have noticeably declined. He does not claim that the trend will continue with mechanical necessity, but he does argue that the more liberal, democratic, capitalist, and cosmopolitan the world's institutions and values become, the more peaceful it will be. The first major step towards a reduction in violence is the emergence of a strong state, which controlled aggressive instincts within society. And this state was then gradually pacified by liberal democratic norms, while non-violent trading and market exchange is definitive, at least according to Pinker, of capitalism calm the waters of interstate relations. I want to take a look at each of these claims that he makes. Pinker has little to say about the social, political, and economic interests that drove the Enlightenment and the liberal revolutions of the 18th century. Instead, he focuses almost entirely on values as abstract principles, which meant the same thing to everyone, everywhere, because grounded in the better aspects of human nature. And you might think, as a philosopher, I would appreciate his focus on the abstract, but I don't think we can do philosophy that way. I think philosophy, in order to understand the abstractions, has to study the context in which they emerge, and he rarely does that with any detail. As we'll see in the next section, they did not mean the same things to everyone everywhere, but different classes and nations could have opposed understandings of their political and economic implications. Nevertheless, it's true that a new sense of the moral equality of people emerged along with liberalism, and these humanist values, and here I quote him at some length, elevated the flourishing and suffering of individual minds over the color, class, or nationality of the bodies that house them. Then and now, the concept of individual rights is not a plateau, but an escalator. If a sentient being's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness may not be compromised because of the color of its skin, then why may it be compromised by other irrelevant traits? Dull habituation or brute force may prevent people in certain times from following the line of argument to each of its logical conclusions, but in an open society, its momentum is unstoppable. Democracy, in Pinker's view, follows straightforwardly from this conception of moral equality. Now, I think there's some truth to the argument, but I also think Pinker can be faulted for not paying attention to the actual history of democracy. Few of the defenders of moral equality in the 18th century were Democrats, because few recognized the equality of women, workers, and non-white people. Democracy had to be fought for. It did not arrive as an inference from premises about moral equality. Pinker does not examine the struggle for democracy, nor does he trouble himself with the vexing question about whether constitutional rights plus representative institutions are sufficient guarantors of the rule of the people. He has nothing to say about whether class differences can undermine democracy by ensuring that real power remains in the hands of the group that controls essential resources. Instead, he simply accepts that societies that have constitutions and call themselves democratic are. So rather than scientific acquiescence to appearances, but more on that below. For Pinker, democracy is essentially a form of nonviolent conflict resolution. Its success within societies caused its export to relationships between societies. Again, to quote Pinker, democratic government is designed to resolve conflict among citizens by consensual rule of law, and democratic states extended this ethic in dealing with other states. Again, there's some truth to the point. But at present, the consensus is always backed by the threat of state violence within societies and the threat of warfare between them. The absence of war, as the existence of militarized police forces and standing armies prove, is not the same as positive peace. A much deeper form of democracy is required for peace, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the concluding section. Democracy is deepened when it is extended from political debates between citizens to the socioeconomic relationships upon which their lives depend. Again, Pinker is silent on the undemocratic nature of capitalist economies, the fact that they depend upon workers having no control over the material conditions upon which their lives depend, and thus work at the terms offered by the class that does own control universally required life resources. Nor does he note the profound difference between treating nature as scarce life capital for the satisfaction of fundamental human needs, or as infinitely exploitable natural resources for the production of money value for the private appropriation of those who have carved out the world as their private property. Again, for a scientist to ignore the material irrationality and unsustainability of the capitalist use of the earth is a rather remarkable oversight, but Pinker commits it. Capitalism, we are told, is really, quote, gentle commerce, the instantiation at the level, the economic level of liberal principles of self-interest, free initiative, and voluntary contract. Again, to quote him, the word liberal in liberal peace refers both to the political openness of democracy and to the economic openness of capitalism. Capitalism is an economy that runs by voluntary contract between citizens rather than government command. The ethic of